Welcome to the Minnesota Rovers Tuesday evening presentation. Minnesota Rovers is an outdoors club based in Minneapolis, St. Paul. Our members organize trips that range from 1 hour to 2 weeks in Minnesota or further afield. Examples of our activities include hiking, biking, backpacking, skiing, snowshoeing, paddling, and rock climbing. We also organize conservation and trail clearing trips. Our members have experience and skills in many outdoor activities, so if you want to learn a new outdoor activity, we can probably help you. For more information, go to mnrovers.org. Now let's move on to this week's presentation.
Tonight, you're here to hear from Boundary Waters Advisory Committee leadership on Tales of the Trails, hiking and trail maintenance in the BWCAW. Mel Yackley has been active in BWAC since 2021, starting as a clearing trip co-leader. She has taken responsibility for leading the outreach and recruiting committee, increasing awareness and the reach of BWAC. Mel stepped up to serve as vice president of BWAC and was elected to the board of directors at the beginning of 2024. All of these accomplishments led to her being named BWAC 2023 Volunteer of the Year. Zach Thorson has been volunteering for BWAC since 2018 as a trail clearing member, crew leader, and website administrator. He enjoys spending time on the trail and getting to know the enthusiastic volunteers, some of you are here, that allow BWAC to succeed. He is currently serving as the board vice chair, trail committee member, crew leader, and helps maintain mapping and administrative data. Aaron Nelson has volunteered for BWAC also since 2018 as a trail clearing member, crew leader, and photographer. When clearing trails, Aaron enjoys seeing the trail one cut at a time, putting the meaning of slowing down and enjoying the moment into practice. When not on the trail, he is usually behind a computer, fulfilling the design needs of the nonprofits he volunteers for, which also include art galleries where his photos can be often seen hanging for others to enjoy. Please join me now in welcoming tonight's speakers, Mel Yackley, Zach Thorson, and Aaron Nelson.
And thank you for that wonderful introduction, and Rovers for having us and allowing us to share what we do with BWAC and where we like to spend our spring and fall seasons. So when you think about hiking in Minnesota, where does your mind take you? Local parks, state parks, Superior Hiking Trail. When you think about the Boundary Waters Canoe Wilderness area, what comes in mind? Canoeing? Probably, since it's in the name. What we're here to do is talk to you tonight about the trails in the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness. Those trails that will take you away from the crowded lake entry points, these trails that will take you away from those jammed up portages or portages if you're north of the border. Very few people know that there are hiking trails that will take you through diverse ecosystems, allow you to walk along the rivers and lake edges, take you high above the rock faces with lake and forest views spanning the horizon. There's a delay to the click. So why hike or backpack in the Boundary Waters? For one, it's a very special place. For Minnesota, it's one of 4 biomes that exist in Minnesota. The Boundary Waters area is part of the boreal forest, one of the largest biomes in Northern America, a little larger than just Minnesota. And it's right here in our backyard. On a smaller scale, why would you want to hike or backpack in the Boundary Waters? Well, if you want a challenge, pick a trail, go for a hike, you got it. These trails are held to their own trail clearing standards, all cut by the use of hand tools. So these are not your typical ADA standard trails, well manicured versions of state park trails. These trails will definitely scratch your wayfinding itch. So it gives you a good chance to grab your old paper maps, take out your GPS devices and get those updated and head on a trail. Gives you access to places that you can only get to by foot. In some cases, you can have access to your very own lake as you're setting up camp, cooking your dinner, all while watching the sunset. Now, if that doesn't paint a picture of solitude, there are nearly 200 miles of hiking trails in the remote areas. And often you can have these trails and campsites to yourself. You may have gone to the next slide a little preemptively. There we go. So know before you go. These trails are not for the first-time hiker that decides not to do their prep work. These have the means, and you have to have the means and knowledge of trail finding, because these trails in the Boundary Waters will present steep grades, little to no signs or blaze marks, very few structures like bridges and boardwalks, and water crossings, they have plenty. So unique aspects to the trails in the Boundary Waters, these things can change seasonally or even overnight as a storm blows by. So things that you might find out are frequent tree blowdowns, more wet areas, and brush obscuring the trail. You could hike out on the same trail in the spring and have a wonderful trail and go ahead and hit that trail again in the fall, and you could be facing 3, 4, 5 foot trail brush that covers your entire trail. So with unique trails come unique skills. Definitely needing maps and compass skills will assist you in finding your route and land navigation. Another big key point on knowledge before you go out is self-reliance in emergencies. Go into the Boundary Waters knowing you are responsible for yourself. But with all that being said, don't let the challenging part fool you into taking yourself out of experiencing these wonderful hiking places. As long as you're prepared and educated and know where you're going, have proper navigation, tools, anybody can come out and enjoy these trails. So even with BWCAW, we even have volunteers as young as 14 years old join in our trips, as long as they are accompanied by a parent or a guardian. Know before you go, part 2. The Boundary Waters, as big as it is, it can at times be closed. So you definitely want to get the knowledge before you go on out there. So make sure you visit the ranger station, talk to the rangers, get that up-to-date information before you head out. Your trail might be open, but knowing where things like fires or closures are, and if they're moving close to where you're at, that certainly could assist you in a safe extraction if needed. So permits. Permits are required year-round for hiking. There's quota permits that are required through May through September. And then there's non-quota self-issuing permits. And those are going to be from October to April. Now, nobody's saying that you have to stay in camp while hiking these trails. And no, I'm not talking about circumnavigating a 42-mile trail in one day. Great if you can, but you can also go to the Boundary Waters and pull a day permit. Hike in, enjoy the land, enjoy the trail, and hike out. So why permits? Permits are a great tool to know when people are in the wilderness in case of an emergency. Also, permits and the data that comes with it helps the Forest Service track the user numbers, which also may impact funding in those areas. So with all that information, we are going to toss it over to Zach, and he's going to talk about the specific trails.
There you go. All right, so now that we know a little bit about what's involved getting on trail, we're going to get a kind of a brief overview of a bunch of the trails out there, kind of trail mix, you could say. But there's a number of trails on here. This is naming kind of some of the larger ones. There's also quite a few smaller trails that we'll kind of touch in brief at the end. But what you have is you have a mix of loop trails like Sioux Hustler, Angleworm, Snowbank, and Powwow are all kind of loop trails, and a mix, and as well as some point-to-point trails that involves the Keck and Border Route that are kind of make up one long point-to-point, and the Brew Lake Eagle Mountain Trail that make up another. So let's look at some of the trails here. We'll start out with Sioux Hustler Trail. It's the other SHT, I guess S-HT, but some of the sites along here are it's one of the loop trails here. The main draw is kind of Devil's Cascade. That's kind of at the very bottom of the loop. You can see a picture of it in the lower left. It has a lot of gorgeous kind of backpack only sites and a lot of what Aaron mentioned, a lot of those wet water crossings and quite a few areas where the trail kind of disappears into the weeds a bit and you have to kind of work your way through it and figure out where to go. But overall, it's pretty well marked. So this is the overall trail here. It's like it's a 32-mile lollipop loop. One of the difficult things if you're planning to hike this trail is along the western edge. You can see there's kind of a distinct lack of campsites. So when you're choosing your route around it, you have to take into account that you'll probably have a pretty long day, at least on one of your days, depending on how far you like to hike in a given day. It's usually a fairly minimally maintained trail. I'll say that for now. BWCAW's starting to send more and more trips there. But like any of the other trails, it may involve some route finding and things like, looking for rock cairns and other stuff along the trail just to help you find your way, as well as those heavy water crossings. And as of now, it's maintained by BWCAW, as well as I believe Northwoods Volunteer Connection does some work there, and there's just other ones from various organizations that will volunteer in that section of the forest. So next up, we have another kind of set of loop trails, the Snowbank Lake Loop Trails. This is more a series of loop trails than any single trail. There's a lot of loops around both Snowbank, Disappointment, and a few more remote lakes. Most people know it for some pretty nice like panoramic views on the rock faces, which you can see from the photos there, which is one of the reasons why it can be tough to follow, because it's a lot of following along some of the rock cairns and rock piles like you can kind of see in that bottom center photo there. But reasons you might go on it is for those views, to access some of those remote lakes that you can get to by canoe, but it's sometimes fun to hike to as well for fishing and other things. And there's quite a few kind of old growth pine forests when you're not up on the rock bluffs exploring around. So you can see the loops you have quite a few options if you were to go to the Snowbank area. You can kind of choose your own adventure for which hikes you want to go and how far you want to go. There's a few recommendations up there just off various loops you can take, but you can go anywhere from 20 to 40 miles, shorter if you do it there and back. But most of them have quite good views off some of the bluffs. There's also quite a few campsite options, so you don't have to be quite as careful. A lot of them are shared with canoers, so you may frequently encounter a canoeist that's already been there, unlike other trails, but with the number of selections there, you should be able to find a site at some point. And this one is, being a fairly popular trail, is fairly well maintained, short of those bold rock bases that are, yeah. It varies by year. Yes.
Along the eastern half, when you're going past Disappointment and Parent, it's super overgrown, and there are, as of last year, and there are a lot of tree falls.
Okay, yeah, I've heard some tree falls in that area. So yeah, like all the trails, it can vary even in a year. It can go from clear to brushy, overgrown, and tree falls. But appreciate it. And the maintenance on this one, it encompasses part of the KEC, so the North Country Trail Association covers part of it, and then just various other trail volunteers for that one. And speaking of the KEC, we'll now loop over to the KEC. Kekakabik, as mentioned before, is a point-to-point trail, which can make it a little more difficult to hike than some of the others, but it has a lot of scenery that's hard to reach in other manners along the trail. It is now part of the North Country Trail Association, or North Country Scenic Trail. So if you want to hike that whole thing along and pass through the KEC, that's a possibility. The pictures here all look pretty clear, but you can see it has had some fire damage in the past. There are large sections that have become quite brushy in the summer. It's probably a little easier to follow in the spring or fall than midsummer. I've seen some photos recently of, ferns up near someone's forehead, which is always interesting to try to traverse through. So the full distance it's a 42-mile straight line, but the tricky part about it is to actually drive from the start point to the end point is about 180 miles. Because you have to cut quite a ways south on Forest Service roads and cut back up. So if you're planning to hike it, it either takes a very willing person to drop you off in carpool or an organization where you each, park at either end and trade keys on the way past each other. But otherwise, the there and back is doable. It's just quite a long trail to do that on. And this one is also maintained by the North Country Trail Association, the new Kekakabik Trail chapter that I believe used to be its own club for that one. So, and similar to the Kekakabik and connected to it, you have the Border Route Trail, which I believe has some history with Minnesota Rovers, if I remember right. The Border Route Trail is quite a long trail that passes a lot of nice steep bluffs, a lot of great overlooks. You'll get a lot of scenery along it, but it is fairly remote and can be tough to access because of that. Let's see, I think this is the only one that was long enough actually to break into two maps just so you could actually see a little of what was going on. So it's 65-mile long trail, only a little over half of it is actually in the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness. The rest is still in this, Superior National Forest and still in some pretty rugged area. It's just not officially contained within the Boundary Waters. But this one, just like the KEC, because it's in the same area, has also had some fire damage and blowdowns that you'll have to either hike through. You'll see evidence of saw cuts or just see the forest as it's recovering and grown back up. And also similar to the KEC, transportation from beginning to end can be a little bit tricky. Yeah. Campsites I don't have marked in this map.
Firings out there.
There are firings out there. They prefer campsites whenever possible. Like when you're hiking the Boundary Waters, you are potentially allowed to disperse camp. They would still strongly encourage you to find a campsite unless you need to. There's special regulations for hiking there if you do decide to camp off trail.
Most of the campsites. Few hiker only sites, but
Yep.
also
Yeah, some of the loops like Sioux Hustler and Powwow have some hiker only sites, have a higher proportion than some of these longer trails like this that are a lot of shared. And you can see on the map here, there are also, if you don't want to do the whole thing, there's quite a few kind of spur access trails, most of which actually end up connecting to campsites or, canoe sites or portages that let you access the trail or just do kind of a day hike in, which I believe is our next slide here. So this is just a few of the more common spurs. These are mileage you could easily do just in kind of an overnight weekend if you wanted to get a feel for the border route without committing to a long trek of it. The first two are kind of easier kind of sampler hikes of the border route, whereas the last kind of set usually end up ending at a campsite are still nice scenic routes in their own. I haven't done a lot of these. This is just what I've heard from other people. I've heard heard good things about Caribou Rock and the Mucker Lake, but I haven't managed to make it out there myself. Now, Brule Lake, Eagle Mountain. A lot of people have heard of this one primarily because of that view in the bottom center there, which is, the tallest, I'll put it in quotes, mountain in Minnesota. I just can't call it a mountain, but it's still quite a tall point. So that the main draw is from the eastern side. You can access the trail to go to the summit. The western side, the Brule Lake, is a little less well maintained. BWAC has a long history with that section, and we helped establish the Fishhook Lake campsite on that side of it, which gives you one more site along that route, so you don't have to go to Whale Lake and hike all the way through to the other side. We'll see the overall length of the point-to-point is about 11 miles. There's a couple campsites on Whale Lake. Those are probably the more popular. Pretty much the route from the eastern entry point on the Eagle Mountain Trail to that campsite is the most well-maintained section of the trail. It's one of their more popular trails just because of the Eagle Mountain overlook there. And as you pass Eagle Mountain and head over to Brule Lake, it gets a little more rugged. There's boardwalks that need some maintenance and some wet water crossings. So I guess the none well maintained applies mostly to the eastern side, but now angleworm, which I'm probably the least familiar with out of these. I don't know if anyone here has made it up that way, but from what I've heard, it's kind of a good smaller loop. We'll go to the mileage in the next slide here. There are some decent kind of overlooks along there and plenty of campsites to choose from. So it's about 13-mile long loop, which is much more doable in a short weekend if you're short on time, but it is fairly far up north, so it'll take a bit to get there. But there are plenty of sites to go and just a nice, well-maintained trail overall, with mostly because of its proximity to Ely. Like, it makes it much easier for them to access and maintain and take care of it. And now for the trail that we suddenly have a ton of photos of, because it's been one of the main focuses of BWAC to clear the Powwow Trail. So Powwow Trail, you can see in quite a few of the photos, has a lot of short pine trees. That's primarily because in 2011, there was a large Bogami Creek fire that burned almost the entirety of the trail, short of maybe 3 smaller green zones that are dispersed throughout the trail. And you can see one of them kind of in the southwest side that's over near kind of Lake 3 Portage area. Most of this trail in the southern and eastern side were old logging roads from the Forest Center, from the old town of Forest Center before this became part of the Boundary Waters Wilderness. But the western and northern sections can be quite rugged, and you saw some of the photos there of some of the rocky climbs earlier. So in general, when it's clear, you can make good mileage in the southern and eastern sections, but you're going to have some slower going in the upper parts. What it gives you is access to quite a few lakes that are pretty remote and almost impossible to canoe to. There's some you can canoe to that is done infrequently, and there's a couple that there's just no canoe access to at all, like Rock of Ages and Path and Mere on the western side, on the more rugged area there. Other reasons to hike it is interesting to see the kind of fire bounce back from it. At the moment, the jack pines are sitting at about 14 feet tall, which is quite a bit taller than they were when we first started this clearing project, but you're finally starting to get to see under the underbrush and see some of the debris slowly disappearing anyway. There are quite a few beaver dam crossings. There can be wet spots on the trail. There's a few places in particular where beavers have decided to build entirely new dams, which makes for thigh-deep water crossings and other difficulties. And yeah. And there's some other smaller hiking trails dispersed throughout. I'm sure I've missed some in this, but these are at least on the western section. There's a lot of kind of smaller, shorter spur trails and other ways you can hike in the Boundary Waters Wilderness without having to commit to a longer backpacking trip or without doing it there and back on an existing one. Some of which are winter only. There's a lot, like North Arm has a lot of nice ski trails, mostly in the winter, which is just near Ely. All right. With that, we're going to go into a bit of what BWAC does, and I kind of mentioned it a little bit there, but we'll go into some more detail on the history here.
Now that we've hopefully enticed everyone with our beautiful pictures of all the amazing trails that are up in the Boundary Waters, I have to lower this a little, I'm shorter. I'm going to talk a little bit about what are me, Aaron, and Zach, why are we here? Why are we in this position? And there's a whole bunch of other people in the room. Do you guys want to raise your hands if you're also a member of BWAC, just so people know who else they could talk to if you had questions or anything like that? Thank you. So you keep hearing the word BWAC, right? Boundary Waters Advisory Committee. We affectionately call ourselves BWAC. It's much shorter. And so, yeah, we are, what do? We are a 501c3 nonprofit. We're a complete volunteer organization that is dedicated to preserving trails in the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness. So I'm just gonna do a little bit of history about BWAC. So how we started back in 2002 to 2010. We started as a grassroots organization back in, again, 2002, advocating for the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness, specifically the trails. It's always been an all-volunteer organization and has been a steady voice for users of the trails in the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness. And there you can see a very beautiful picture, 2002, that's Superstition Lake along the Powwow, which is one of the pretty remote lake, as Zach was just talking about the Powwow Trail. That's one of the places we could be. 2002 to 2010 continued. Here are some photos of some earlier crews. I think that says 2008 Brule Lake Trail, the Kekakavik Trail. As you will see, there is snow in the picture. We definitely tend to frequent all sorts of weather, including snow. On the bottom picture, it looks like everybody's pretty soggy. So we are taking volunteers of really all different levels and all different experience backgrounds to various trails in the Boundary Waters to do maintenance work and make sure they're accessible for future generations. So if you're not as inclined to go hit any of the trails we've been talking about on your own, or you want to go with people who are experienced, we will take you. And we're getting to have more and more variety in the types of trips we're able to do. Here's another photo. Look at I think there's a familiar face there. Paul is in green here, I believe, right? Yep, out there on the CAC in December 2008. We don't do trips in December 2008 officially. We may recreationally, but yeah. That's the type 2 fun, they call that. Here's another photo, 2009, again on the Kekakavik Trail, just to give an idea. Again, all the work done within the wilderness has to be done by hand. We can't use mechanized equipment at all. So we're not out there with chainsaws or lawnmowers or anything else. We have to use, we use loppers and pull saws for the most part to take care of these trails. Then continuing on our work, 2011 to 2020, our advocacy and maintenance efforts continued, including again on the Keck. And then there was a catastrophic fire that burned the Powwow Trail down to the tread in 2011. It's a Pagami Creek fire, if people are familiar with that. And so BWAC began focusing a lot of its efforts on the Powwow Trail beginning in 2015. There are several of these trails we've talked about that probably wouldn't exist if BWAC hadn't been there to maintain them, and that still is the case. I mean, if volunteers aren't out here maintaining these trails, they're not going to exist, because the Forest Service certainly does not have bandwidth or capacity. So it is all volunteers that are keeping these trails open. There's a Kekhabik Trail photo from 2011 there between Glee and Fay Lakes. Looks like a very pretty place for a break. And here's some photos along the Powwow Trail. There's the Pagami Creek fire. And we do all of this work. I did mention the Forest Service. We do all of this work through a partnership with the Forest Service. So when we're out there, we're really acting as, stewards of the Forest Service. And they help us with some of our supplies and things like that, and coordination and permitting. We began advocating in 2012 following the Pagami Creek fire to attempt to maintain a section of the Powwow Trail that again had been burned, the tread, and we were approved to do that. So we were able to restore a section which went to Pose Lake, and then by 2020 we were able to actually have the trail punched through, I would call, not like a state park or anything like that. It still is not like that, but it was passable, and it just improves every season that we're able to get out there. So we're sending quite a few crews to the powwow every spring and every fall, in addition to other trails. There's more photos. So this is a spot that everybody on a BWAC trip that goes to the Powwow Trail is familiar with this spot, because we all take a crew photo here usually. And you can just see the growth in 4 years, how much different it looks from 2016 to 2020. And now it's even more full. I mean, we're 4 or 5 years later after from that 2020 photo. It definitely continues to provide plenty of work for us. And the conditions are always, the beavers are always changing the conditions too, because they're flooding, and where it could be dry in the fall, the following spring, you could have knee-high water to walk through. So here's just a very beautiful picture of the Powwow Trail in the fall. I don't know if there's much better time to visit the area than in the fall, in my opinion anyway. And then here we're bringing us up to present. BWAC has continued to grow. It sounds like Rovers kind of grew too following the COVID pandemic and the introduction of being able to have more access to these meetings and things like that. But BWAC has grown a lot as well in the last several years. We're reaching new enthusiasts each season, continuing on in the spirit of wilderness trail advocacy and maintenance. And yeah, like I mentioned, we can't do all of this without all of our volunteers. They help keep the trails accessible, and also just increase awareness about the fact that there's even trails in the boundary waters. A lot of people are very surprised by that. So yeah, the more awareness for trails and just people even using the trails is good for the trails. More on our growth. I think Zach mentioned, we've started working on the the Sioux Hustler Trail and the Eagle Mountain Brew Lake Trail as well, in addition to the Powwow Trail now. And we do have the history of working on some other trails within the Boundary Waters. So some stats from our last clearing year, actually, this is from spring and fall 2024 combined. 98 total volunteers safely. That's our priority, safely and hopefully fun. We want safety and fun. Completed a combined 15 trips, and those were to the Powwow Trail, the Sioux Hustler Trail, the Eagle Mountain / Brew Lake Trail. We cleared 42 miles to standard and surveyed 72 miles. So that's a big part of what we do, as well as sending out a crew to figure out where do we need to send more crews for work. Nearly 10,000 cumulative volunteer service hours, which, if I'm not mistaken, I think the Forest Service values each hour at $31. So it's a pretty big service to, you know, to trail users, to the Forest Service. And this is a kiosk that they put up at the Powwow Trailhead to show the regrowth, which is really fascinating to look at. You need to go to the trailhead to see it. We could bring you if you wanted to go. We would happily bring you. Or you can go yourself, obviously, right? Yeah, here's a photo. We love to take these before and after photos. Like, we'll come to a really brushy area, or, you know, where you really can't see the trail, and we'll stick somebody in there and say wave, and then we'll take their picture, and then we'll clear it out, and then we'll have them take a picture there again to sort of really show why do we need to be out here? I mean, this is why. You can't see the trail, and now you can see the trail. That's at Campfire Lake area in 2023. Yeah, no matter how much work we do, there's still plenty of maintenance to do. And we are bringing crews on single day trips, which really, actually, it should be kind of day hike, because we'll drive to the trailhead, but we're staying multi nights, but we're like day hiking in. We do multi-day hikes, backpacking, paddling, car camping, day hiking. So with these additional trails that, like the Eagle Mountain Trail and Brew Lake Trail, they can offer us kind of some other options. So we can offer trips to more beginner friendly trips, which we're kind of excited about, because not everybody's ready to take a 3 or 4 day backpacking trip with a bunch of people they've never met. And you know, it's awesome to think about being able to get people maybe out into the wilderness who didn't know whether they could otherwise or on their own. So one of the things that we hear sometimes about BWCAW being unique, we are very much built up of mentors. People in BWCAW, really, the leadership, we really kind of geek out on helping people learn about new gear, learn about how to backpack, how to go canoeing. We really do enjoy that. And we also, you have an opportunity, if you start volunteering with us a lot, to become a crew leader potentially, to become one of us standing here doing these presentations. We do a lot of training before we ever get out on trail. So we vet people pretty closely too, because we want to make sure that it's a good trip for the person that we're talking to. So if it's somebody who's, you know, maybe never backpacked before, do we want to take them on the 11-mile hike in? Probably not. But do we have another trip that might fit for them? Yeah, we probably do. So we vet people really closely, because we want people to be safe and have fun, so that they'll want to come back and volunteer more, and they'll want to go back to the wilderness. So we vet, and then we also have a crew member orientation for everybody that's held locally, usually at REI. And then we also have a shakedown pre-hike with all of our crew members to make sure everybody has the right gear, that we're not bringing too much, we're not bringing too little. Just, yeah. And we're holding like an overnight in April, just so, and everybody's really welcome, but also it's just a nice place for people who are maybe newer to this to try out their gear. Maybe they're trying a new water filter and they want to try it around people they know are experienced, and they can do that locally. We want to make sure that whoever we're bringing on a trip with us or into the wilderness is going to be safe, and that everybody knows the expectations going in. So, and fun, right? You see the word fun there, right? So what do we need? We need you. We need volunteers. Right? We've said multiple times, these trails won't be accessible if we don't have volunteers out there doing this sort of work. And we really do value our volunteers and enjoy teaching people. And we all become friends too. And you just never know what sort of adventure you might be getting into going on one of our trips. And here's just our QR code and some ways you could help. Of course, volunteering for a trip. Also, if some people are not able to go on trips, I mean, one day I won't be able to go on trips because my body's going to be like, you're not doing that anymore. Because physically I won't be able to forever. But we do also welcome people volunteering at our events or we do all sorts of other things. So people can ask about leadership. Just get out and use the trails, because using the trails helps with brush work. Spread the word about what we do and follow us. There's our giant QR code. At home it's not giant, but in the room it's giant. So you can follow us so all of our trips and events are posted on Meetup. And then we also have Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and we have a very, very nice website because Zach does a great job on our website. So there's a lot of good information out there. And then we also have all these events. It was so cool to see all the events that Rovers has. We have all these events too. We're kind of swinging into a very busy season. So we've got a hike coming up on February 22nd near St. Paul at Crosby Farm, which I think Rovers just must have had one too. And then we're going to be launching our trips for people to register on February 25th. So that will be the date that if you're on our meetup following, you'll get all sorts of notifications that trips are open. We're going to be tabling at Canoacopia, which is in Wisconsin. And then a big local event that we're holding in Minneapolis is our Boundary Waters Trails kickoff event, which is kind of to get everybody ready and excited for the upcoming hiking and backpacking seasons. We're going to have some clinics there that one is about food and water in the backcountry. One is about ropes and tarps. And then another one will be about orienteering and navigating in, actually not just in the wilderness, but just orienteering and navigating. And food, there'll be food. And then, yeah, you can see we've got a couple other things related to trips, our crew member orientation. So yeah, we keep pretty busy. And we're always getting into more things. I think that's about all that I have, but we very greatly appreciate Rovers letting us come to present to all of you. And if you have questions, we would love to talk about trails, about volunteering. whatever people might have. Are there any questions that people have? Yeah, we recently had our, this is a photo from, we've just started in the last couple of years having a winter leadership retreat for all of us to go to, where we do a lot of learning and we do a little bit of fun too, because we're up in Ely and you can't not go and have fun if you're in Ely in the winter. So, yeah, there we all are in matching shirts. We do have a lot of fun. Yeah, I wouldn't, so I've done the full SHT and I've done a lot of boundary waters and I wouldn't say the gear is a lot different. I do use different footwear in the boundary waters. Yeah, just boots. I don't do trail runners usually in the boundary waters because, well, particularly on the powwow, because I've had a lot of things, I've worn trail runners and it was a poor choice that I made because a lot of things were like sticking through my shoes. So, and then I tend to, and people differ on this, but I wore different gaiters when I'm in the boundary waters than I would on the SHT because of all the beaver reroutes all the time, the wet feet.
Maybe the breakfast tent too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Okay.
yeah.
And hiking poles can be useful for beaver crossings, but it's like when you're crossing beaver dams, it's very unstable footing.
So I use hiking, I use hiking sticks on the SHT too, because it can be a lot of scrambling and stuff, or, yeah. Otherwise, like the basics, you have the same food storage, right? You have to have bear resistant things. Yeah, and then of course, if it's a clearing trip, we have different gear. But yeah, I think it's pretty comparable. It's just the terrain is going to be different, and then the signage and whether you can see your trail or not.
Yeah, so another thing is if it's an area that has been burned and there's not mature trees, you may not be able to hammock camp.
Yeah.
So just depending, part of the trails, there's no problem, part of the trails there is a problem, so it would just be knowing before you go, what's your trail that you're hiking in a burn zone to where you can't hang a hammock.
I don't know.
Yes. Okay.
And I would mention too, a lot of people don't realize, like, I personally would not go hiking in the boundary waters in July and August. I just, even mid-June and on, it's not only the bugs, but it's so overgrown. It kind of can be miserable unless you're on a really well-traveled trail, like the Angleworm or the Eagle Mountain Trail would probably be fine. But some of these other trails, I just would not have very much fun.
I've heard people talk to somebody about powwow and Sue Hustler, that he was suggesting winter camping.
No.
Is that what you're?
The powwow,
Spring and fall.
yeah, in the powwow you can't get to really in the winter unless you're going to snowshoe 17 miles first, but which you could. You just take a minute. It might take a week or something. I don't know. We thought about it. I'm not kidding. Yeah. Yeah.
Mel, can I just remind you, if there's a question, could you repeat it?
Oh, I'm sorry. So, I was just answering the question, and the gentleman in the audience was wondering about gear differences between like doing something on the Superior Hiking Trail versus being in the wilderness. Sorry, I didn't repeat that before. Are there any other questions?
Got a question from the chat. Michael is asking, is a backpacker competing with canoe campers for campsites on snowbank? It looks like a number of the campsites are on the water.
I would say, so I don't have to repeat that, right?
Should have picked it up there.
So in the boundary waters, if the campsite is accessible to canoes and backpackers, it is really first come, first serve, and it's a different atmosphere than like you might experience on the Superior Hiking Trail where everybody shares the camps, and that's the expectation. That's not the expectation in the boundary waters at all. So do expect to possibly have to continue going if it's a campsite that is canoe accessible. or be prepared to disperse camp too, which is much more frequently done in the boundary waters. You can't on the SHT. I mean, that's called, what do they call that? They don't like it anyway.
No.
It's not good. Don't
And
do
it's
it.
Private land too.
Yeah, it's not good.
Some,
Stealth camping.
Yeah.
Yeah, don't do it
some parts of the SHT have closed because.
because people going off trail.
Another chat question.
Will you have similar training, et cetera, before the fall trips, or should the fall trip volunteers come to the spring training? That's a really good question. We do all the training before each season goes. So we'll have spring training, which the dates are up there right now. We're gonna do the same cycle again in the fall.
26.
And it is scheduled for August 26th at REI. We actually already have it on the calendar. We're getting very organized. So yeah, we do the same training because we get new volunteers all the time, and we want to make sure that people are ready to go into the wilderness with us. So again, they can have a safe and fun time and keep coming back because it's kind of addictive.
And that and your crew hike give you a chance to meet the people you'll be going in the wilderness with before you go out with,
Yes.
if you're unsure about that.
Yep.
At least see them face to face once.
Yep.
Or twice.
It's pretty, and some people might think that it's a lot before a trip, but there's a reason that we do all of it, and it lends to successful trips and good dynamics on trips. And no major injuries. Yeah.
Tabling event.
So the gentleman in the audience asked what a tabling event is. So Saturday, April 12th, we are tabling at REI in Bloomington. It just means we'll be doing it, and Jerry works at the Roosevelt one. So REI started offering clubs like ours to come in and do a little presentation to the employees that are working that day to, raise awareness and tell people what we do. And then after that, we set up a table, and then people will come up and talk to us at REI. It's sort of like, when you go in the grocery store and there's free food, it's like that, but no free food. And we might recruit you to volunteer. I don't know. Does that help?
It does.
Okay. Any other?
Could you say a little bit about the trail kickoff? Do people have to register? Where will they do that?
Good question. So Stacy's asking about the kickoff event and registration and what that looks like. So the kickoff event is hosted by BWCAW along with the North Country Trail Association, the Kekakabic Trail Association, and the Border Route Trail Association. We've been doing it for I don't know how long, but we we've tried to make it larger since we all lost the Midwest Mountaineering Expos. So we're holding it now in Minneapolis, actually at a location, the Hubert H. Humphrey School of Public Affairs, which if you went to the expo, that's where they used to have some of the the presentations. So it's a familiar place for people. It is $15 paid ahead of time through Meetup. And we just decided last night we're going to have Chipotle. And so, the morning will consist of all the trail groups. We're also, Leave No Trace will also be there. The Northwoods Volunteer Connection will be there, and the new Driftless Hiking Trail Club, which hopefully people are starting to learn about, but this will give them more exposure. They will be there. So in the morning, folks can visit with the different organizations, hear about what we're up to, and then we'll have lunch, and then we're going to have the clinics that I talked about earlier. We don't hold that hybrid or anything like that at the moment. It's possible we could do a live. Yeah. We don't have a producer for we're calling all producers for the nonprofits. Yeah. Good question.
Thanks for watching this Minnesota Rovers presentation. If you want to see more, please click on the link to our channel or the subscribe button below. Thank you.